Hello, everyone. My name is Peter. This is The Burning Question. Today, we have Kevin Kung, the co-founder of Safi Organics and founder of Takachar. Thanks for coming and having a chat with us, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for having me here.
So I think for everyone who doesn't know what Safi Organics is, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started there and where you are now?
Sounds good. Well, the premise of Safi Organics is actually around smallholder farmers in rural places like Africa and India. Mm-hmm. And the cases, what you find is that often these farmers spend 3 to 5 times the world price on their fertilizer. And the reason behind that is that because a lot of that is being imported. I mean, a lot of the chemical fertilizers are being produced in centralized places and are imported, and that logistical cost and the importation cost often is significant. Because a lot of these farmers end up having very limited income to spend, they often can only afford the cheapest synthetic varieties that in the long term actually acidifies and degrade their soil. And in places like Kenya, that is a huge problem. And a lot of farmers essentially missupply different types of fertilizers, which results in nutrient leaching and eventually yield decrease, often by half over a period of 20 years. And it's causing a lot of food insecurity. So what Safi Organics does is that we sort of outsource the bulk of the fertilizer production to sort of village level, right? So what we do is that we use locally available crop residues and labor to produce a biochar-based formulation that then when it's mixed with nutrient can be done in a much smaller input level while still achieving the same and in many cases better effect on the soil because it sort of reverses that soil acidification degradation. And for typical farmers that we see is that they often see an improvement in their yield by 30% even after one season of using our product.
Wow, that's awesome. So this is a pretty compelling story. How long have you guys been at this, and where are these farmers in this 20-year, 50% degradation of their soil story? I mean, are you coming to them? Is that what the situation is now?
Sure. I mean, we started actually 2013, so it's been almost 7 years. So I guess if you want to talk about a farmer story, let's focus on a farmer called Mr. Kibushi. So he is a farmer which is in the Moya region of Kenya. It's about 150 kilometers from Nairobi, northeast toward Mount Kenya. And he grows sort of this rice. I mean, it's a rice growing belt. And so what happens is that oftentimes he spends maybe $100, $200 sort of per hectare on the inputs, right? But still, often the times, I mean, since he was, I mean, now he's like 50 something, but since he started farming around 30s, he did notice that there was a pretty significant decrease in the crop yield, right? I mean, it's not going to be a constant decrease year after year, but I mean, obviously it fluctuates, but ultimately in the long term, he did notice that. And so we approached him in 2017, and he started a small trial with the product. And after one season, he sort of saw pretty good performance with part of his land. So he came back for more. And eventually the income that he was able to get from selling the excess rice was able to, was around 50% increase. So that was able to not only send his 3 children to school, but also allow him to invest in a second-hand tractor for his farm.
Nice. So that's a pretty dramatic change. Is that something that I know farmers here in the U.S. Don't know farmers in Kenya, but farmers in the U.S. are pretty competitive, and once they see someone doing something that is helping, they tend to want to get on board pretty quickly. Like, how fast has that fueled your growth, and where are you guys now in your growth trajectory, say in Kenya?
Yeah, right now we serve about 4,000 farmers, so it's still a relatively small company, but we sort of double every year or something. So I mean,
double every year.
Yeah, so far, so we'll see if that trend continues because of COVID or something.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, right now, sort of the way we start a new community is actually look for some of the sort of the elder, kind of more respected farmers. Often they're also a bit more affluent, which means that they are often able to take a bit more risk,
Right.
right? The sort of the idea is that we start with just part of their land using the biochar-based formulation, right? And sort of compare and see the results. And if they see a good result of, I mean, most of the time they do come back for more of that. And essentially many regional sort of young farmers, what they do is that they sort of aspire almost to become this older farmer, right? So, I mean, that's sort of how we found the marketing to be most effective was through this sort of mouth. We do use local agrobets, so these are the agricultural input and export, input and input kind of middlemen. But obviously, ultimately, the product's only going to flow if there's demand coming from the farmers.
Right. And so 4,000 farmers, how many people, I mean, Safi Organics, do you guys own the machines? Do you sell the machines? How do you guys operate?
Yeah, so right now we essentially get the residues locally, and we have this village-based fertilizer production called the mini plant. So it's up to serve a radius of about 10 miles, about 1,000 or so farmers. And right now we operate it, and we then package and sell the product to the farmers. But I mean, in recent years, I mean, it's sort of in the past year or two, because of the sort of, I mean, the increase in demand, I mean, a lot of the time it sort of outstrips our production capacity. So we have had to contract out some of that biochar production to others in the surrounding area.
Cool. What kind of, you know, one of the things I think about a lot, because, you know, biochar is, it's a relatively speaking, you know, it's a low price. It's hard to get a lot per ton for it. And so pretty quickly you run into questions of biomass transportation and cost of producing it. How do you get people to bring their field waste? What kind of field waste is it? And, you know, are each of these places profitable?
Biomass is very context dependent, right? So what I can tell you is our experience in this community that may or may not apply, right? For rice, I mean, rice, the benefit is that, I mean, after harvest, I mean, normally the farmers regionally, they bring their rice to a local mill to, I mean, essentially to have the processing done there, right? And after milling, I mean, that rice husks and those residues still belong to farmer. But sort of centralized, right? And so we sort of set up our equipment very close to that vicinity. I mean, starting point, because obviously when we start, I mean, we want to start with the easiest kind of a scenario, right? But later on, I mean, we did have, I mean, more sort of the distributed mode production as well, as I described earlier. But what we found is that usually if you are within sort of a 10, 15 mile radius, I mean, so locally produced, locally sourced, I mean, that tends to be competitive with the existing fertilizer price. In fact, when we first started, we were actually able to show that the product we produced was actually 20% lower cost compared to the traditional fertilizer. And that's why we try to sell sort of the cheaper product, and it didn't sell at all. Well, wasn't really a popular product, and so we sort of was wondering why. And then it turned out that even though a lot of the farmers who are cash strapped, they relate price to quality, right? So if you a cheaper price, they sort of automatically assume it's a lower quality product. So now we sort of to the price of the chemical fertilizer. I mean, sort of per ton, not per ton, per acre per season to that, right? So the farmers pay the same, but what we can get, what we can deliver is that at that price, their yields as well as the performance of the crop and the soil will increase compared to the traditional fertilizer.
Interesting. So how much do you how much is it? How much do you have them put down, and how much I guess how much do you guys produce?
Right now we are about I think 2 tons per day. That's sort of a capacity. Yeah.
Is that 2 tons per machine or for the whole organization or?
2 tons per day per equipment, and that's
Mhm.
and exactly, and that's biochar basis. That's not a
Right.
biomass basis.
Um, and then and then how much do you recommend that farmers apply? Because obviously you're mixing it then with fertilizer, but um, how much biochar is going out into the fields? Is it a ton an acre or 10 tons an acre or just a little bit, or how do you think about it?
It also depends, right? So the first thing we do before we even recommend any of our product is to do soil testing.
Mm-hmm.
So we look at a pH.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at, at least the macronutrients. I mean, we can't, I mean, it may not be feasible to get all types of micronutrients, but at least the macronutrients and those kind of things, and identify where are the gaps in the nutrient and sort of how the pH looks like.
Got it.
That's when we sort of, recommend application rate as.
Sorry, we just got interrupted by my 4-year-old son. So go on, Kevin.
Where were we?
I'm talking about the testing that you guys do
Sure.
on behalf of your clients.
Yeah, so essentially before we even recommend our product or say that it's a good product, I mean, the first thing we do is soil testing, because a lot of the time it's not even done in this region, at least in these communities. So we do at least pH as well as the macronutrients. The micronutrients, some of those could be done, but some of them could be challenging. But at least on a high level, we identified what are the nutrient and the soil gaps, sort of what are the gaps, and then we recommend the rate as well as the nutrient formulation accordingly. And a lot of that depends on the soil type, the pH, nutrient gap, as a crop, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of factors which we have to learn over the years.
And if you had to estimate, just in a range, how much are people putting down? Is it just a little bit? Is it tens of tons?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the scientific literature, right? I mean, people would recommend a few percentage, but that's quite expensive to an investment, right? So normally, I mean, when we start with, I mean, what we found is that even if you just start with like 100 to 500 kilograms per hectare, I mean, you will still get a result, right? I mean, that's obviously not sort of the full rate. But the idea is that, I mean, if we sell that as a standalone certified fertilizer, right? So farmers use it year after year. So after 10 and 20 years, their soils eventually build up to that level.
Mm-hmm. And so just, thinking about it from the production perspective, can you describe the machine that you're working with? Is it, what kind of pyrolysis is it? And considering it's based on, it sounds like mostly rice husk, does it run year round, or is it just for a period of the year?
Sure. So I think now we're moving towards Takachar, because that's the machine. Yeah. So Takachar, the company was actually formed, as my PhD work at MIT, because at that point I was working with Safi Organics and witnessed a lot of the technical challenges and issues that the production was having in the field, right? Sort of these open source technology, which was not very scalable. At that point I asked, well, what could we do to ensure that, it's more continuous process, and B, has more control, which means that we can actually know what we are getting and not just an ad hoc kind of about just fire hope for the best.
Right.
And that's what we do actually at Takachar. So the idea is that a lot of the biomass sort of crop and forest residues are very loose, wet, and bulky, right? So it's very difficult to either transport to a centralized place or even convert, because, if you have a technology that can only take one type of biomass, let's say groundnut shells or something, if you change it to something else like wheat straws or wood chips, things like that, often case it will fail. Right. What we have been looking at, part of my PhD work at MIT was to say, can we actually decentralize this production process and make the equipment robust enough, right? So can we imagine small-scale, low-cost portable systems that we can latch onto the back of tractors and pickup trucks and deploy to rural areas to do this kind of conversion on site in a continuous manner, but also sort of enable sort of this higher degree of control.
Yeah.
So, that technology was developed, in response to some of the challenges we saw at Safi Organics, right? Still a prototyping phase, so we just moved out of the lab prototype. So that's something we actually are still testing, but
Progress.
Yeah, so our hope is to do sort of the first kind of field testing with Safi Organics in Kenya in 2021.
Amazing. So, just stepping back from the actual implementation of it via both Takachar and Safi Organics, and thinking about it from a climate perspective, do Safi Organics or do the people that, farmers at a field level participate in carbon markets? Like, do you guys sell the offsets that you derive from the product? I assume that there's, 2 tons a day times, I don't know how many machines you have, but you end up with a couple thousand tons probably.
Yeah, we don't do climate, unfortunately, and neither do our farmers so far. So far, our focus has mostly been helping farmers improve their livelihood. And I think, for us, what we have tried with Safi Organics is to say, is this biochar business that could stand on its feet just on economics terms? And what we have shown is that at least at this scale within its communities, it is a profitable company with a $0 per ton CO2 pricing.
Right.
Obviously, if later on up and coming legislation or policies do make the carbon market more favorable, that's something I think at a larger scale, that's something definitely would make sense for us. Mm-hmm. And potentially could also help us reach broader impact. We definitely think climate change and sort of carbon sequestration is important. Except, right now, at least within this market, that's not something that the farmers pay for. But right. In the process of applying the fertilizers, in their soil, they sort of inadvertently are sequestering carbon. That's how
exactly. Yeah, maybe there's a way to figure out how to compensate them. And then, as you kind of figure out the technical piece with Takachar, and then it sounds like scaling piece with Safi, like how big are you aiming to push these organizations, and what are your expectations over the course of the next, say, 2 to 5 years?
Sure. I think, our vision is global, right? I think ultimately, this is a problem that's not just in Kenya or even in sub-Saharan Africa, right? It affects more than 2 billion farmers worldwide, right? Sort of a lot of lands are sort of being degraded, and even if they are not, they are sort of on course for being degraded by 2040. So it is a concern in many parts of the world, mm-hmm. And also coupled with sort of COVID, that actually causes a lot of the fertilizers, for example, the supply chain being disrupted, and farmers in our markets unable to get even some of the basic necessity inputs for their land. And that's where I see there's a big potential for these kind of a localized sort of production of nutrients for the soil on a local level. And I think right now, we're sort of still pretty small, right? We are sort of within a region in Kenya, but I think this is something that, if successful, definitely something that we want to bring beyond just one continent.
Great. Well, I don't want to take too much of everyone's time, and I'm sure there's a lot to follow up on here for the people that would be interested in. Is there a place where we can kind of follow your progress or stay connected with what you're working on?
Sure. Our companies, you can find our website. Safi Organics is Safi, SAFI Organics .co.ke. Mm-hmm. And Takachar is just takachar.com, and our email addresses are there. Great. Yeah. But if you want something that's easy to remember, you can reach us also at trashiscash@mit.edu.
That's nice. I like that one. Well, thanks so much for sharing this story with us. It's so exciting to see this progress you've made, and I really look forward to hearing the next update. Do you have anything last to plug? Are you raising money, or do you need help with anything in particular from the larger community?
No, I mean, it's my pleasure to participate in this and really hope that more people are involved in this space. I don't think it's crowded at all, and I think there's a lot of opportunities in both sort of carbon removal as well as biochar for agriculture.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Great to chat today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.